I'm always asked everywhere I go, Mike, what's the secret? In fact, can you tell me the most important thing that I need to know to be a good plaintiff's lawyer? And I say this all the time. I said it yesterday when somebody asked me that. You got to know anatomy. We do not learn anatomy in law school, obviously, and it's not something that most of us are naturally interested in. But learning anatomy and being able to talk about injuries in a specific way is so critically important, not only to being knowledgeable in taking depositions and trial, et cetera, but how you present. So let me give you some examples. Let's say you come to me and you're asking me to get involved in a case, or you're asking me for advice. And I say, well, what kind of injuries do you have? And they go, it's a back case. I'm going to say, can you be more specific? Well, it's a back surgery case. Can you be more specific? If you're unable to give specificity as to the location of the injury, the type of injury, the size, the specific surgery that occurred, my first instinct is you're inexperienced, you haven't done this very much, and maybe you don't really know what you're doing. The same goes when you're taking a deposition and you don't know this anatomy, what the defense lawyer is thinking. The same goes if you're talking to an adjuster. So I want to spend just a few minutes talking about the back, because I see the back, the cervical and lumbar spine, and the injuries and surgeries to that being the least understood and something that is probably most important to your practice. So let's take it kind of foundationally. The back has vertebrae. You can feel them in your back. And there's the cervical, which is the neck area, thoracic, and lumbar. That's why they have C in front of the number for cervical and L in front of the number for lumbar. Right? Most injuries that occur from a traumatic injury occur in the cervical spine or the lumbar spine because that's where the spine moves. It's not very much in the middle of your back. And that's why in the middle of the back, you don't see injuries to the soft tissue discs. You see broken vertebrae because it doesn't move. It's a static thing. So the vertebrae in the cervical and the lumbar spine have numbers, C1, C2, C3, C4, through C5. Lumbar, L1, L2, all the way down to the last thing, which is the S1 sacral. And in between the vertebrae are basically jelly donuts, the discs. And so the vast majority of your injuries in a spinal case happen to the discs or the nerves around the discs, not the actual bone vertebrae. And so when you identify where that disc, that soft tissue, non-bone tissue, not soft tissue like, oh, it's a soft tissue case. Every non-bone case is a soft tissue case. Don't buy into the vernacular of that means it's a small injury. But the vast majority of all of the spinal injuries are to the soft tissues, the discs and the nerves and the ligaments surrounding the discs. And the way you identify them is they are between the numbered vertebrae. So that's why you see, well, there's an injury at C5, 6, which means it's the soft tissue between the 5th and the 6th vertebrae. So when I say, well, where is the injury? You being able to say, well, there is a 3 millimeter bulge of the disc at C5, 6, I know, the defense lawyer will know, the adjuster will know, that you understand that there was an injury to the disc space a little bit down the neck at the area between the 5th and the 6th vertebrae. Now, the reason this is so important is if you think about the area between the vertebrae as a jelly donut, it literally has jelly in this viscous material, And if it gets squished or pushed too hard in a certain way, like when you're in an accident and the forces squeeze the disc too hard, it squirts jelly out. That's a bulge, or that's a herniation. If the jelly actually comes out, it's a herniation. And if the jelly just pushes the disc and makes it deformed, then that's a bulge. And the reason that's a problem is because around the jelly donut are the nerves that are going from the spine down your arms for the cervical spine and down your legs for the lumbar spine. And so if you've got a nerve that's not hurting, but now the jelly donut squirts disc material onto the nerve, it's going to hurt. If it pushes because it's bulging out, it's going to hurt. So a larger bulge at C5-6 is going to push on the nerve that runs down a certain part of the arm. And if that pain goes all the way down, it radiates down. They call that radiating pain. And the reason that it's so important when you see defense lawyers saying, well, when did they first report radiating pain? When did they first report, radicular pain? Same thing. Is because radicular pain happens when you have an injury to the soft tissue areas that are affecting the nerve. And so if you don't have radicular pain, then it's a lot less likely that you have a serious injury to the disc. But if you have radiating pain, then you have to address that injury or the pain's not going to go away. Okay? So you number the vertebrae, and then there are three main types of back surgeries that we're going to see in our practices. There is a discectomy, a laminectomy, and a fusion. So let's talk about that. So a discectomy is that disc, that jelly donut that has been deformed or has squirted out the jelly. A discectomy, scectomy means remove, is basically they go in and they scrape away the part of the disc that is pressing on a nerve, and they hope it, relieves the pain. As you can imagine, when you mess with what God intended and you take away disc material, that might alleviate some pain in the short term, but you're probably going to have some problems down the road. But it's a less invasive surgery. Many times, that bulging disc, that malformed disc, pushes the nerve against the bone, and a laminectomy is a removal of part of the vertebral bone, part of the vertebrae, to basically make the area bigger so there's more space to house an inflamed area without pushing against something that's going to make it hurt. So a discectomy, you remove the disc scectomy. Laminectomy is you remove the laminectomy, the lamina removal. And lamina is just a certain part of the vertebrae. Right? The most serious surgery, though, is when you have instability in the bone, you have too much damage, you have something that can't be fixed by just taking out disc material or making more space, and you have to solidify the area so it can grow back and fuse together. And that's called a fusion surgery. So when you have an injury to the spine, you're going to look at where on the MRI it shows the bulge. It's going to say L2-3, L4-5. It's going to identify the areas between the vertebrae. Right? Then if you have pain that radiates down the legs or down the arms in the area where that bulge would be injured, that's further confirmation that you have a problem at that level. And then depending on the severity of the level, the doctor will recommend either to remove some of the disc, and you can do that with less invasive, called a discectomy, make more room by removing some of the bone, called a laminectomy, or fuse all the bones together, take out the discs completely, and put bone in there and have it one solid mass. And so nothing's pressing against the nerve because there's no soft tissues there. Those are the three surgeries. So the next time I ask, an adjuster asks, a defense lawyer asks, well, how much do you think this case is worth? What's the injury? You being able to say, well, there's a 3 millimeter bulge at C5-6, which required a laminectomy, which didn't work and therefore required a fusion, is a very specific description, will let the other side know that you know exactly what you're talking about. That's why anatomy is so important.